Okay, everybody, as we are letting people in from the waiting room and people are kind of trickling in, I just want to thank you guys all for coming and joining us tonight, virtually at least. Um, yeah, I think we will start with introductions really quick. My name is McKenna. I am a student worker with the Career Success Team's events and programs, and I will be facilitating and hosting tonight's event. Tonight, I am joined by Jason Ragland of Maxar Industries, who will be giving a presentation, our second in our How to Get Hired webinar series. Tonight we are focusing on engineering in preparation for our computer and engineering job and internship fair that will be taking place next Wednesday in exactly a week. And yeah, so just an overview of tonight's event. Jason will kick it off with a 45-minute presentation, and we will follow up with a 15-minute Q&A section or session. Pretty much the same thing. But yeah, if you have any questions for Jason, you can submit them to the Q&A box. I see that somebody has already discovered that, but it should be at the bottom of your screen. If there is a question someone else asks that you would like to be answered, you can upvote them. We have enabled that feature. So yeah, we will be recording tonight's session, and we are recording it right now. So we will be uploading that to the Career Success YouTube page, and within a few days of this webinar being posted. But yeah, if you have registered for this event, you will be automatically sent a link to the recording. But otherwise, you can find it either on the Career Success YouTube page or our website. So yeah, with that going, I'll let Jason take it from here.
Okay, let me get... Go up. There we go. Okay, hi. So my name is Jason Ragland. I'm a section manager for the Communication Systems Engineering Department at Maxar. If you don't know who Maxar is, we make satellites, among other things. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Little background about me. 35, been married for 13 years as of yesterday, and I'm a father of a 5-month-old daughter. I live and grew up in Pacifica, just up the coast from UCSC. I transferred to UCSC in 2010 and graduated with a bachelor's in double E in 2013. I helped more officially form the Amateur Radio Club in 2012. And I was the president of the Tau Beta Pi California Alta Delta Honor Society in 2013, my senior year. Kind of some career highlights. I worked as an Android developer for 3 weeks. You can ask me about that if you want. I basically didn't have any other jobs going into graduation, so a former Tau Beta Pi member gave me interview invite, and I guess I passed, and then subsequently got an interview at SSL, which is now Maxar, and then kind of went from there. At SSL, or now Maxar, since about 2017, 2018. When I first started, I worked on this thing. This is Jupiter 2. This was the largest satellite we had ever built up until that time. I was a support engineer, just kind of supporting the other engineers and my lead, take care of documentation and things like that. Then after about 9 months or so doing that, I was able to get my own payload on a different satellite. So I did that for about another year. Then right before Hispasat 1F was going to start testing, I one of the engineers on Jupiter 2 left to go to a different department, so they asked me to come back and be an actual, responsible engineer for about half of the satellite. I did all of the testing for that satellite all the way through launch and in orbit testing, taking over as the lead during in orbit testing. Then when I got back from Wyoming doing that, I got put on Eutelsat 7C. By this time, I had fully moved into a testing role in a different department. I was getting all of our test plans ready for that. I was going to be the RF lead on that program eventually. Then there was a bit of a shakeup in the group where our director left to go work at SpaceX. His role was filled by a section manager in another department. The lead on Telstar 19V took over her role as section manager, so I got kind of accelerated into a lead role. I worked on Telstar 19V through the rest of the program, all the way to an orbit test. I actually got to go to Cape Canaveral for that one. That was kind of fun. While towards probably the end of 2017, development on Jupiter 3 started. This program has actually been in the works for probably almost 5 years at this point. So to put it into perspective, Telstar 19V was the heaviest geostationary communication satellite ever launched. It was about 7,000 kilograms. Jupiter 3 is larger than that. Jupiter 3 is actually now the largest and most complicated satellite we've ever built. It's really hard. I've been spending a lot of work on it, but sometimes your career is a little more important than a fun project. So a position opened as for the section management role in my group. So I took an opportunity to take it and kind of take my career in another direction. And I've been doing that for about 2 months now. Have about 15 employees, and I actually handle the most of the resume viewing and hiring decisions for my part of the group. So I thought it was good to give a talk about that. What I'm going to talk about today is how we specifically, and more specifically, how my group does hiring. I may touch a little bit on how that might differ from other places, especially when it comes to like computer science and more of like software hiring. Since I have done an interview on that, it's a little different. I'll do some resume tips because I see a lot of resumes and I see a lot of the same problems and good things about resumes. So I want to talk a little about that. I want to talk about phone screenings because there's actually two different types of phone screening. Some phone interviews will be called a screening. I'm going to go over the other kind, the kind that I do, and what you should expect going into a phone screening. I'm also going to talk to what to expect in an interview, since a lot of times that's also not talked about. And then I'm hoping to kind of go quickly through this so that there's room if there's lots of Q&A, because probably I won't touch on the thing that you want to know about. So first, the hiring process. Step one typically starts with someone applying on our webpage and submitting a resume. There's another way to get your resume in someone's hand, and that's at like a career fair or something like that. Typically, if a resume is being handed to someone, it's being handed to someone in HR. I can't accept resumes directly. It's kind of like a legal kind of gray area. We do hiring at career fairs, which kind of sort of combines step 1 and 2, but I think we probably would still do a phone screening, but you kind of get a free screening at like a career fair. Step 2, once the resume gets to me and I've read it, I will decide then if I want to do a phone screening or not, and I'll talk about what that is on the next slide, I think, unless the next slide is resume tips, then I'll talk about that. Um, After the phone screening, if it's been determined that the applicant is a good fit for an interview, then we'll schedule an interview, and that will typically be a panel or a series of individual interviews, and it kind of depends again on how we're doing the hiring. And then after that, it's negotiations for a job offer. So I only put a few things on here. You can Google resume tips. There's tons of stuff on the internet, but kind of the things that I see, I feel most of you are going to be new college grads. You should probably be documenting all the classes you've taken. That includes the subject matter, any labs you did, specific hardware you worked on, get the names correct of the hardware, and have a really exhaustive, almost like a CV of a bunch of stuff. And then when you apply for a position, you would tailor it to that role. So if you're going to apply to my group, we do a lot of RF engineering. So things like spectrum analyzers, network analyzers, amplifier design, filters, things like that, your EE 157s and the like. You wouldn't put you know, the class you did assembly language in C probably, because it's just going to take up room. So it should be somewhat tailored to the role. You should be able to back up anything on your resume. So don't just put it on there because the job application said, you shall know this, and you kind of know it. You could try to qualify things with saying like proficient in this and use adjectives to kind of clarify how much knowledge you have in an area. But if it's on your resume and we see it, and we're going to probably want to talk about it during either the screening or the interview. In general, if you have any work experience, again, that's relevant, that should be first. So internships, even things like labs or your senior design project, if that's relevant, those should all bubble up to the top. A new college grad resume, I feel, should be less than a page. The resumes I've seen for junior-ish, like early career and new college grads that are more than a page, a lot of it tends to be fluff. I like to see more like facts and not someone explaining stuff. You should be able to, in very short sentences, explain with a few bullets what you did either in each class or in your project or at an internship. This tends to only happen with people who've done like military academies for whatever reason. I guess it's something with the military or the government, like big verbose sentences, but yeah, should be less than a page. You should try to keep your resume interesting. So you should be at a high enough level that we're not getting bogged down into little details, but also detailed enough so that it doesn't look like you're just dancing around a subject. So you want to describe what you did, but use actual terms. Don't just have a giant run-on sentence. It should be very much to the point. Most people, if I'm only going to spend like 30 seconds usually on a resume, if it's not exciting by then, it's probably going to get put on the back burner. There are people that say like if they can scan through it and they don't see anything interesting, they'll just throw it away. There's a ton of kind of memes, I guess, with resumes and how hiring managers handle them. But I'm working 40 hours a week. I'm at home. A resume pops in. If I'm scanning through it and it doesn't look like it's a fit, then I'm not going to read it. So if you had all the important stuff at the bottom, I'm just not going to get to it in time. So bubble the important stuff to the top. Okay, so you've applied and I've read your resume, and I think that we should move forward. I will send an email to you that basically says, hi, this is me, this is where I work, you applied for this job, a little about the company. Do you want to take some time to have a phone conversation? Part of this is to key you that when you schedule this, this is the position you're applying for. A lot of places will say like, hey, you applied here, do you want to talk? They don't list the company, especially if you're talking to a recruiter, because a recruiter won't necessarily have the email address of the place you applied for. So the screening email will be very detailed. They may include the actual position description from the job site you applied for. Um, this type of screening is like 10 to 30 minutes. It's pretty quick. All I'm doing is I'm verifying accuracy in your resume. If you said you designed a FM transmitter and we go to talk on the phone and you actually didn't design it, your lab mate designed it and you were just kind of there along the ride and I'm kind of getting a sense of that during the phone screening, then I'm basically doing this so we don't waste time scheduling an interview for someone who probably either weren't very accurate in their resume or a lot of times it's questions I have about the resume. If you said you designed a bunch of things, I want to find out like, did you actually design them? What parameters did you shoot for? So some of it is questions that may come up during an interview. So it is partly technical. I am trying to see if what you're talking about in your resume. I'm also looking, do you at least sound eager to work? Do you come in right away saying like you have 5 interviews this week and you're just kind of shopping around? Are you hiring at multiple positions at my company? Especially now, are you willing to relocate? We are hiring a lot of people that went, you know, because there's work from home, they're in San Diego or Colorado or whatever. Um, so it's kind of, how have you been handling working from home? So for you students, you've been probably learning from home for a while. I'll probably ask about that. Like on top of the normal things like, do you work well in a group or do you work better alone? Things like that. How do you work from home? How do you set your tasks up for the day? How do you track your results when you don't have someone, behind your back asking, how are things going? And then really it's questions for you too. So, you applied for a company, you tried to do as much research as you could into that company. Do you have any questions about it? Maybe you were confused about what the position was, and now that we're talking about it, it seems like it's something different. So this would also be times for you to ask questions of, who will basically be your manager if you get hired, about the company. And again, this phone screening is quick, 10 to 20, 30 minutes, somewhere around there. It's almost always over the phone. I don't do these over Zoom. Um, Other companies, I know bigger companies. So I've been pinged by um, Raytheon before, and they do an actual second phone interview after the phone screening, typically with a higher manager. I know some like software companies do this too, where after the phone screening, which is typically with a recruiter for bigger companies, the first phone interview will be with like a manager. And that's just, another step in the process. And then for the bigger companies, they usually send a ton of people, like hundreds at a time, to like a hotel or a resort to do batch interviews. Um, in the past, if after a career fair, if we're hiring like new college grads and we get a ton of resumes, we would kind of do the same thing. We'd set up a day to have a bunch of people come over and do batch interviews. Okay. Yeah. So the technical interview. So phone screenings happened. You will get a call, usually from someone in HR, to set up a technical interview. This would typically be on site, but now most companies, including Maxar, we're doing these over Zoom. This is a actual test of your resume content and maybe not your resume content. I know sometimes we've just not even talked about anything in the resume if we didn't think we had to have you prove anything from it. How we've been doing them, we have 3 people. It's typically been the same 3 people, so we can have like some continuity in how the questions we're asking. So we kind of know one person's going to ask maybe behavioral questions, one person's going to deep dive in a couple topics that are pertinent to, you know, satellite communications payload system design, and then maybe a couple people will talk about testing. This may be different in like a software interview where they may ask you to implement FizzBuzz and insert language of, flavor of the month, or they may ask you to, invert a binary tree or do something. And those may be back-to-back interviews. Typically, since it's on Zoom, we're not having people do a ton of math because it's kind of hard to do. When they were on site, we might draw stuff on a whiteboard. If it's an RF position, we may draw a Smith chart and have people actually do things. Now it's more just like hypothetical questions. We're mostly testing your ability to troubleshoot, especially as a new college grad, and specifically for our company. There's not a lot of companies that do. Headset died. That's great. Okay, I'm back. So as a new college grad, you probably don't have a real firm grasp on a lot of real world applications of your degree. You may have done a couple labs, you may have done a senior design project, but you probably haven't done things to the level that we have done as, professional engineers. So we know that. So a lot of times we just want to find out, how do you work through a problem? A good example is if I asked you, how do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? You probably said, well, you get the bread out and then you spread peanut butter on one side and jelly on the other. But then I said, well, what do you use to spread it? And then you go, a knife. And then I'd say, well, would a sword work? What kind of bread? How do you get the bread out of the package? How do you take the lid off the peanut butter? Where did the peanut butter come from? There's like a lot of unraveling we can do of a simple problem. So since we don't think you can just design a satellite on a piece of paper, we would try to walk through the pieces of the puzzle. The same thing would happen with the programming interview, because they might ask you some kind of weird questions. And then we'll just say, like, start from the beginning. How would you do this in little steps? How would you break it up? We're just looking for someone to just participate in this process. If there's a lot of silence and a lot of, you know, feel free to ask questions. If you ask a question, it doesn't like take a ton of points away. That shows that you're engaging. You know, and it's good if you're just being vocal during that type of interview step. Another thing we're looking for is if you'd fit in. Do we like your personality? this also goes along with the troubleshooting. Like, do you seem like you're genuinely wanting to participate in that? If you seem kind of, you know, like you're getting really frustrated, like maybe we wouldn't want to have someone who's going to be always frustrated. This kind of goes into the last part, which I'll kind of go to, is how did you present yourself? You shouldn't be doing these phone interviews like walking down the street in like a rainstorm. You should be in a quiet corner of your room. We're kind of assuming most people are at home during this time. It's pretty easy to go and like throw on a dress shirt now that we're at home. At least, have combed hair and just be kind of like not, wearing like a t-shirt. This is a professional interview. You can that's kind of different for programming. And I know that that's, kind of different. The company that I worked at, I was employee number 16 of a startup. I'm pretty sure I wore a polo to the interview, like a collared shirt, and I was the most dressed up person at the company at the time. Um, Probably if you're going to go work at a startup, you could ask the manager the dress code and you could try to aim like slightly higher than they would dress. You obviously wouldn't show up with a suit and tie at a startup probably, because that's, a little weird. So you got to kind of know the culture. Culture of a big company like ours is going to be, shirt and tie for an interview. Then kind of the main thing is, do you fulfill the requirements for the specific level of engineer we're trying to hire? So like right now we have a job opening. We're looking for kind of senior people, like maybe 5+ years experience. Um, do they seem like they're a person with 5+ years experience? After about when you start in, at least at our place, when you first start as a new college grad, we expect it to take about a year for you to get fully up to speed on how we do things. That's typically enough time to go through a complete design phase or a complete set of testing and integration. And by that time, you should at least kind of have an idea of how to do things. And once you start rising up through the pay grades, once you get to that second kind of, you're just a regular engineer, you're not a junior engineer anymore. We expect that you should be able to take on things. Like we should give you something and just say, go away and do it, and you should be able to do it. But after about 5 to 7 years, it's in the point of like you're a sole contributor on something. We can not only have we don't have even have to give you the thing to do. We just say, hey, you need to do this, and you know where to find the budget, or you know where to look up the analysis. You know the person to talk to ask for the inputs. So the job application, when you apply for it, it should say kind of what kind of role they're looking for, and that should be spelled out during the interview. And so it should be made clear, are they looking for a junior person or are they looking for a senior person? And so we're kind of hitting the bullet points in the job application and hitting some kind of internal checklist. And basically the question we have to ask ourselves is, can we just put them into a project immediately, or do we need to train them? And this also goes into pay sometimes. So most engineering places have pay grades, and those pay grades have fairly wide salary, deltas. And so most people would be slotted in the middle of a pay grade. That's just kind of how it typically works. But sometimes with a lot of experience for the year and they interview well, they could be put in the higher range, and then you might have leverage in the offer process for something like that. That's basically all I got, and it hit the 30 minutes I wanted to do, so that's good. So do we want to
Okay,
do
so
questions?
we're ready to open it up. Okay, I already wrote in chat to everybody that you can submit questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, but we will be starting with the most upvoted questions first. So if you see a question that you want answered, be sure to upvote it. So for our first question, how would you suggest structuring a resume for someone with little work or in-field experience?
It's a good question because that was me. I was really unlucky with internships. So all I really had for work experience was, I tutored a bunch and I worked at Lowe's for 2.5 years before going to UCSE. So if you have absolutely zero work experience, it kind of goes back to the thing where I was saying you need to document all of your classes, all your labs, your senior design project, really lean on that. I leaned heavily on my senior design project on my resume, and it happened to be building a satellite ground station for ham radio, so it kind of helped in that instance. But what my job as the interviewer during an interview is to control the interview. I want to ask you questions and see how you respond. You as the interviewee want to turn the tables and be able to talk during the interview about stuff that you know about. So if you have a senior design project or some project that is very relevant to them, you want to try and shoehorn that into conversation. And so being really detailed with, looking at the job application for relevant points that you covered during that project, even if you kind of have to like round some corners and not necessarily lie, but just kind of like tweak things to sound similar to what's in the job application. You want to control the conversation basically. So you should tailor that all the stuff you did in school to sound like it's really relevant, because realistically that's what you'll have at that point. Most people we interviewed didn't do internships, so I don't think it's that important as people make it be to have a bunch of internships.
Okay, all right. So um, for the next question, we have Jason, what advice do you have for someone who's over the age of 40 and is just graduating with a BS in computer science and will be attempting to get a job in the near future?
So I when I graduated was 28. I know that's not the same age, but I was, at least 3 to 4 years older than everyone that I started to work with. Um, what I noticed, even just being slightly older, was everyone assumed I knew what I was doing. And if I at all knew anything and talked in some authority, people listened to me more than they did the junior people. You can use that to your advantage sometimes. I don't know whether you're coming from more of a technician background and you're just getting a bachelor's late in life, or obviously it's a decision to do it later. Um, yeah, I would just use that to your advantage, that you inherently have more life experience than everyone else, and I don't see it as a real negative at all.
Okay, awesome. All right, our next question is, what is the purpose of the question, do you like to work alone or in a team? What's the response hiring managers expect to hear? Shouldn't you be okay doing both?
Yeah, so this is more in a line of questions that I'm trying to weed out bad group members, basically. So, not that you should lie, but if you realize you're a bad group member, you probably should work on that. But what I'm leading into with that question is, when I ask if you like to work better in a group or alone, we work in groups at my work. Our old president used to say a satellite was 100 people in a million man hours. And so you are working with a ton of people in engineering, and you have to be able to work in groups. You have to be able to get along with people. You have to be able to accept criticism. You have to be able to take other people's sloppy work and turn it into gold. So my follow-up question, depending on which way you go, if you say you like to work alone or you say you like to work in a group, I would then probably ask, when the last time you worked in a group, what kind of troubles did you face and how did you go about that? And if you're a person who always has the answers in those type of scenarios or instantly blames someone else for why things went wrong, then that's starting to kind of paint a picture of a bad group member. So that's why I asked that question. Yes, you should be good at both because there will be times where you have to go off and do a task on your own without involvement from a team. But it's more like a line of questioning that I'm looking for, not necessarily an answer to that question.
Okay. Our next question is, how much technical knowledge do companies expect for an internship, particularly for a sophomore or a junior?
Well, for engineering, it's kind of hard because you don't get to do a lot of the cool stuff till later. Mostly, it's like specifically for my work, you would have done at least something remotely having to do with um, like RF. But typically, what we do for our interns is we basically make them technicians. So which is kind of cool for our work because that means you get to actually touch the $100 million satellite. I don't even get to touch the $100 million satellite. But in our kind of area, we would have them be a technician basically for a little while. They would get to learn how to mate coax, all the mill standards and NASA stuff. We would teach them how to run tests on the test equipment and kind of get a feel for how things work on the manufacturing floor. Then they would probably come back and I mean, you're probably going to be doing busy work that's like Excel based or some sort of documentation that doesn't require in-depth knowledge of the material, but it's just kind of like prettying up, documents for release in some system. So you wouldn't have to be doing calculations, but it would just be, can you follow instructions on a simple task and just do that task all day until it's done? And that's kind of all they're really going to ask. Can you show up on time? Do you know how to use email and like answer a phone? Can you show up to meetings on time? And then if given in like sort of complicated instructions and maybe even a work instruction, like can you follow this recipe list? And that's all they're really looking for in an internship. Maybe like between junior and senior, if you've taken a couple more classes, it may be a little more involved. Probably software is a little easier because you end up taking software a little earlier in your career. So that might be a little different, but not too much technical knowledge, I don't think.
Okay. Our next question is, as someone looking for an internship, what should I do to stand out?
Um, that is hard because, like I said, I've applied to a bunch of internships and never gotten any of them. The only internships I ever got were in my early 20s, and they were working at a software company my cousin worked at. Um, you probably need to get lucky with your course selection. Get some classes that are relevant, maybe even with professors that have industry connections. I think most of it's just keeping an ear to the ground for what is the internships that are happening that summer. Like probably, I'm sure the Career Center, I'm going to plug the Career Center, probably has the hookup on internships. A lot of it could be knowing alumni. So I was in the Honor Society. That's how I got my first job out of college. Any kind of clubs you're in, IEEE, knowing people in industry, getting connected on LinkedIn, and then just looking for posts. I think it's mostly just about being diligent. I don't know the internship selection criteria, but yeah, it's probably just having relevant courses and just applying a lot.
Okay. Our next question, what are your daily what do your daily activities look like as a systems test engineer for satellites?
So, um, depends on the day. As a lead, it's a little different, but basically in the morning, we have a stand up at the satellite. It's usually around like 8 o'clock, 8:30. Um, we it's mostly mechanically driven. It's not so much about RF, just because we're the weird sub uh, subsystem, but it's we go over like what we're doing that day, who has priority for spacecraft rotations. We have to rotate the satellite around. Um, if we're doing testing, what kind of testing we need, and what kind of equipment we need out there. Once the stand-up's done, depending on what day it is, we have a kind of a meeting with the customer and the people on the program, like a status meeting. We usually have them a couple days a week. We go over the status since we last met. Anyone has any questions? Then throughout the day, it's just either meetings for various things, either program related or not. If we're in the middle of a test phase, we would typically have a daily meeting with the customer going over test results. Our testing campaigns usually last like 3 weeks to a month, depending on what we're doing. So it's, every day. If we're in testing, I have, a group of 3 to 6 people working for me on the satellite, working at various shifts. So as one person's leaving and another person's coming on, getting, any status changes from the last shift to the new shift, reviewing test data if necessary, making test reports, a lot of documentation, reports, PowerPoints, Excel, you know, some Python scripting, just a bunch of stuff. So it's mostly just a lot of meetings and a lot of test data review and interfacing with other people.
Okay. Our next question is hello. Well, that's not the start of a question, but hi, I'm currently a second year CS major at UCSC. Do you think it's better to focus on personal projects or getting internship opportunities as an undergrad?
So my biased opinion is personal projects. You should always be doing personal projects. So that the kind of the cliche, you should be working, 100 hours a week doing personal projects on top of school. But um, I don't know. I felt like internships get you a better opportunity at working at a particular company that you interned at. So from what I remember, internships tend to be like the super shotgun approach where you apply to like a million internships and maybe you get one. And if at the end of that internship you don't want to work at that company, it's not that you wasted a summer, but um, maybe it ends up not being relevant, but a personal project could always be relevant. And you don't have to apply to do a personal project. You can just do that whenever you want, and you get to pick the personal project. You may do an internship and for CS you end up coding some app or something that they throw away in 2 months and you don't know about it. Um, so I mean, my opinion, I would say personal projects are probably a lot better use of your time, and then just apply for internships, and if you get them, then that's cool.
Awesome. Okay. Next question is what kinds of projects would you expect to stockpile into your CV for software engineers?
So if you don't know what kind of software engineer you want to be, I would do projects for all the different aspects of software development. So back end, front end, you know, probably multiple languages, you know, pick some frameworks. I mean, there's like the joke that JavaScript makes a new framework every week or every day for that matter, but you know, pick a couple languages that kind of cater to front end or back end. I mean, obviously, you know, can't go wrong with Python. It kind of works everywhere. Um, you know, maybe look at a couple like websites and see how what their stack looks like. I wouldn't necessarily pigeonhole myself with a particular stack, but you know, it couldn't help to know some back end, some front end, you know, some database, you know, web scraping, Discord bots, you know, like there's tons of projects out there to fill up, you know, your resume with. And, you know, if you happen to know you like a particular thing, then maybe do a deep dive in, you know, web apps or, you know, whatever your particular thing you like is. Yep.
Okay. Next question is, how much of an effect does attitude or personality have during an interview? For example, after getting the interview, how much does personality matter compared to experience?
So it's going to be like a sliding scale. If you absolutely kill the interview and you're kind of maybe grouchy, maybe we take a risk on it. There's plenty of people that I've worked with that are really intelligent, but I wouldn't want to spend more than 10 minutes with them. Um, you know, when we're interviewing for coworkers. Like I'm literally putting my engineers to interview. They're interviewing for a coworker. So if they think in that hour they spent with you that they can't stand you, I don't think is if you're even if you were the best person they'd ever talk to, they may have to pass just because you know they're going to have to work with you for the next you know the near future. So you know even if that means if you know I'm not talking about having like a monotone voice or things like that. It's more just like kind of back to the working in a group thing. Like if it sounds like you hate working with people, everyone else is to blame, you're the best thing since sliced bread, then, you know, go work somewhere else, you know? That's kind of the way I think about it.
Okay. Next question is, software engineering positions have cracking the coding interview and leak code. What are some resources what are some resources you would suggest for technical interviews for EE?
For EE, it kind of depends on where you're applying, but in general, like you should know how a transistor works, you should know how an amplifier works. Like you know what is linear amplification versus saturated you know output power type of things. There's probably some resources, but EE is so broad um, because there's like power, there's you know communications which is fairly niche. um, then there's like amplifier design, there's PCB. There's stuff that bleed into like computer engineering with FPGAs. So it kind of depends on where you want to go. Then you'd have to kind of look at what kind of there's probably some resources online to find out what kind of interview questions. But I think in general for new college grads, it's kind of like knowing how an amplifier works, knowing your, you know, rough, you know, Maxwell's equations, like kind of how like fields work and um, Ohm's law, things like that. That kind of stuff will come up, and then it just kind of depends on the industry where you'll get like particular questions.
Okay, and just as kind of a self-check, we have about 10 more minutes left for Q&A. So the next question is, what's a standard experience path that a software engineering undergrad student should be looking at in order to maximize chances of comfortably securing a stable job after graduation?
see. I have no experience with software engineering at UCSC. I think, like I said to the other person, um, you should be looking to either go all in on one thing or try to broaden your portfolio. So, like I said, research a couple different stacks, learn a couple different languages, know front end and back end, how to make an app, how to make a GUI, how to, you know, ping a database, how to scrape stuff, how to parse things. I think it's just kind of like an all around approach is probably good, because even if you get hired somewhere as a back end developer, they'll probably ask you to do the whole thing, since that seems to be pretty popular nowadays, is forcing people to do, everything.
Okay. Next question is, how do you view PhD students differently from undergraduate students or people who have a few years of industry experience while hiring? Should PhD grads be applying for intro positions or ones requiring a few years of experience?
So PhDs are interesting because although you have a lot of experience, it tends to be on one very narrow portion of a discipline. So if you're applying for a position that happens to land in that narrow portion, then by all means apply for a more senior position. Um, I think I was talking about earlier how our place works. Technically, we have pay grades 3 through like 7 for one job. So I have people that make nearly double the intro people, but they technically could have applied to the same job. So a lot of this happens in the last step after the interview. Um, some places do actually split out the hiring, but a lot of times if you picked the intro position and then during the interview they're like, wow, this person actually knows a lot more, if they have a position at a higher pay grade, they may be able to bump you up a couple spots. I know a lot of places will have that leeway where they could go up or down a level based on experience during the interview and move it around. So yeah, and
Okay.
then
Oh,
I think it's under the answer tab right down at the
oh
bottom.
yeah, sorry about that.
It's okay. The little first part. So PhDs different from undergrads or with a few years. So again, it's like I said, technically a PhD just went hard on one very narrow field. As far as your breadth of knowledge, if you basically have a master's degree as far as your breadth of knowledge. So they probably would give you a couple years experience bump. But if someone had real industry experience versus a PhD with no industry experience, I probably would take the real industry experience because they know how to actually work at a job and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Our next question is, RF is one of the final courses for EE. What are some suggestions for a second or third year student who is just approaching EE 101?
Yeah, that's what kind of sucks about EE and kind of the structure of UCSC's electrical engineering department. You don't get to do the cool stuff until like maybe even the last quarter. And it's all a roll of the dice of what classes were available at a certain time when you were, able to take them, and then when the next ones come around. I know for me, I got to take DSP when I was there, and that was like rarely offered. Manti randomly offered it when I was there. Um, yeah, I would just try, if it doesn't look like they're offering cool things, you kind of got to ask the higher ups in the EE department, like ask your professors, like, hey, could you guys squeeze in blah, 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 next year? Other than that, I would just try, again, personal projects. if you've taken EE 101, you can probably build a power supply or something. You might be able to take like summer classes. I know I took the transistor class over summer to like catch back up because I was a transfer and missed, that first year of taking classes. So yeah, personal projects, and then you might have to take stuff over summer. That's just kind of how it works.
Okay. Our next question is, where should you draw the line for including unrelated work experience on your resume, especially if you have limited job experience?
Um, then it's kind of on like a scale of how unrelated it is. At some point, you are just trying to show that you did work. I'd have to go back and look at my resume to see if I included the fact that I worked at Lowe's on there. I might have. I'm not really sure. Um, I mean, I think if it's not completely cluttering everything up, it kind of could help because um, part of starting a job as an engineer is if you've never had a job, it's just knowing how to go to work. Like, you know, showing up on time, showing that you worked, even if you worked at Safeway for like 4 years, the fact that you worked there, and if you, even moved up a little bit, that you're able to go to work every day for an extended period of time and like kept your job, that means a little bit. So, if you can't fill it in with other things, and just at least showing that you're able to work at a job and not get let go is actually probably a positive.
Okay. Our next question is, would having a man bun significantly hurt my chances of getting hired? Would it be considered unprofessional?
One of my coworkers has a man bun, so as long as you're okay with someone joking about your man bun during staff meetings, then it's probably fine. I mean, there's people
Okay.
I work with tattoos and like blue hair. Most places it probably won't matter.
Okay. Next question is, does Maxar have a mentorship program for university students to participate in for better understanding of the company and its culture?
We, I forget when it was. We had UCSC people come out for a panel that I was on last year, I think.
Yeah, I think we had a company tour with you guys.
Yep, and I was on the panel. So I've been bugging SSL for the 7 years I've been here to interface with UCSC, and it seems like they finally started doing it. So, I mean, our company's on the page. We're trying. So yes, if you want to bug one of your professors for a tour and talk with UCSC, the Career Center, and then if obviously right now is probably not the best time. Actually, it might be a good time now because there's no one there. But yeah, there's definitely there are ways to get tours if you know the right people.
Okay. All right. And for our final question of the night, what kind of personal projects are worthy enough to put in your resume?
Realistically, it could be anything. I mean, if you have a ham radio license, that just shows that you're interested in something. If you knit, I mean, anything could go in there, even if it's just like a little throwaway at the bottom. But if they're relevant, or something that you put a lot of work in and actually like looks professional, then yeah, I would put your personal projects in there. I mean, you have to decide how relevant, or what's too personal, or whatever. But yeah, I would put whatever you can. If there's room, I'd put it in there.
Okay. All right. So that's going to do that, or that's going to do it for our How to Get Hired webinar in engineering. I would just like to say a huge thank you to Jason for joining us tonight, and thank you to all of you who also joined in. We have a survey that will automatically populate as soon as you exit the webinar. So if you could please fill that out, that would be great so that we could improve future events that we host. And then also, as just a PSA to all students here, we have a couple of awesome virtual events coming up. Especially, we have another How to Get Hired in Tech webinar that will be hosted by NVIDIA. You can find more info on our website, careers.ucsc.edu, or on Handshake. And just so that all of you know, since I know that most of you should be interested in our CC fair, we will be having, I know there have been issues with just the limited amount of time that employers can have for students and interact with students, and a lot of our slots filled up. But we have an interest form that you all can fill out. I just dropped the link to it in chat. So it includes all of the registered employers for the event, and you can send them your information after the fair has concluded. So if you're not able to get a spot with the employer or an employer that you would really want to, I highly suggest filling that out so that they can have your information and try to follow up with you. But yeah, otherwise, that concludes tonight's webinar. Again, thank you, Jason, for joining us. And I hope all of you have a great fall quarter.